Nick Kroll joins me now in Studio Q. Hello.
Hi. What a great intro song. And a great intro.
Thank you very much. So this is a film about a guy who makes a ton of money in tech, then he loses everything. What kind of appealed to you about this sort of falling from grace story?
Well, I think in this case, I think we're all, people have asked me like, well, have you had any sort of where you have to restart entirely? And I think the truth is that people have major breaks that make them restart, or a relationship ends, they lose a job, they move, whatever it is. But I think also we're constantly always starting over a little bit. And so I identified with that. One, as an actor and writer and comedian, there's constant levels of small amounts of rejection that you deal with, and you're constantly restarting.
Yeah.
So I was drawn to that, and the story itself comes from I have 12 nieces and nephews.
Okay.
And I have been asked to babysit maybe once, and I'm the godparent to none of the children. So I was thinking, what would it be like if a younger, selfish brother like myself all of a sudden was thrust in the role of caretaker for one of my nieces or nephews, and that sort of became the basis for what became sort of the film.
Well, I definitely identified with the selfish younger brother thing.
Yes.
I have an older sister who is a better human than me in every single way. And I thought that was poignant that's where your character was learning about family, because that's a lot of where I learned about family.
Yeah.
She just seemed to get it right away.
Yeah, I have an older brother and two older sisters, and the character Justine, played by Rose Byrne in the movie, is somewhat an amalgam of my two sisters. And I think for sure it's taken me a lot longer to realize the value, not the value of my family, but I think when you are the youngest, you can get away with a lot, and you just don't have the same. You're sort of, everything's sort of been handed to you, and you end up sort of being a little more selfish, I think, oftentimes.
Is that what drew you to this project, or was there other things?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it, was sort of, and now that I've been finished it and I've been talking about it, I'm realizing like, oh, I'm sort of working through the guilt I feel sometimes as the younger brother who, even when we were growing up, we'd have family dinner, and I was always the first one to be like, all right, I got to go out and meet my friends, or I was ready to go away, or I wanted to go away for the summer, whatever it was. I just was always, and my sisters and really my brother were always a little more helpful around the house and stuff like that. And I think that part of the idea with this movie was sort of dealing with that.
Interesting. I learned how to feign incompetence.
Yes.
At a very young age.
Yes.
To get out of work.
I managed to still do that. Yeah, like I was like basically I was resigned to like sort of do the dishes, but I was never great at it, and so someone would have to end up helping me out. Yeah.
I want to talk to you a bit about Kroll Show, if that's okay.
Sure.
The comedy in that show comes from characters who have very little self-awareness. I'll say, like Bobby Bottle Service. Why do you think an oblivious character like Bobby Bottle Service struck a chord?
Well, I think there's I don't know. I think people like to. It's fun to make fun of people who take themselves quite seriously and don't, again, have much self-awareness about it. I'm not sure why. I think it allows them both to be awful, but there's also, I think, at times a sweetness to it.
Yeah.
So it's like you're making fun of them, but also, there's some level of sympathy for them. I guess I'm not sure. It's an interesting, until you start to talk about your characters, you're not always aware that as to why. I'm not self-aware as to why I did it, but I think so I don't always have the best reasoning for it. It always strikes me as kind of funny. Characters who think of themselves as quite important when they're not. I mean, anyone who thinks of themselves as important and doesn't have self-awareness, there's just something funny about people who take themselves quite seriously.
It's odd that it is sweet, as you said, at the same time. Like Bobby gets choked up when he says his mother.
Sure. He loves his mother so much.
Where do you find those quirks?
I don't know. I mean, I think like inherently that kind of guy has always sort of is obsessed and in love with his mother, which is both weird and sweet. And I was watching the Survivor. There's a character on Survivor this year. There's a guy from Boston who, in one of his speeches, like talks about how deeply he loves his mother.
Yeah.
And it was the weirdest. It was very surreal. And then I mentioned him on I was doing Conan, and then he started tweeting at me. Like so psyched that I was talking about him. Again, no awareness or care that I was making fun of him, just excited to be acknowledged.
Is it intentional that you inject this sort of sympathetic quality in these characters? Or this is just what comes out? Because you do a lot of improv, right, with these characters?
Yeah, there's a lot of improvised moments in the shows. And I think, I think it's just, my instinct is if you're going to come back to these characters a lot, like, I feel like you just kind of want to like them.
Yeah.
And you want to find some likability in them, because there are plenty of people out there who are miserable or kind of awful people, and they have friends.
Yeah.
And they're, and people are like, yeah, it's just Bobby, and I feel like characters can be a similar thing where you want to watch them be awful and do terrible things, but also if you keep coming back to them, there has to be something redeeming about them in some way. I just feel like, the characters I do, it's just more interesting when you infuse them with love.
Why is this something you return to so often in your comedy? These sort of ignorant characters.
I don't know. I feel like they're just. I tend to find. People, I think very smart people can be unredeemable as well.
Yeah.
So sometimes smart people are pompous and not that likable to talk to or watch. So I think, it's like there's nothing conscious about building, a character that is going to be a certain way. I think it just sort of happens organically if it strikes me.
Do you think we're sometimes jealous of this lack of self-awareness that some characters have that we see on reality TV? I mean, it's a shield, right?
Oh, no doubt. I think I used to do a joke about how I think dumb people have better sex than smart people, because they're just not thinking about it. They're not self-conscious. They're just acting. And I do believe that to be true. I think that a lot of times, like, dumb people are having especially on reality TV, like they're more apt to forget that the cameras are there and just get deeply in and start to live in whatever reality it is that they are in.
Yeah.
And sometimes smarter people are not going to give up control as much, and therefore might be less interesting to watch.
And maybe not as present, because they're in their heads.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like some people who aren't thinking as deeply about these things are going to be just more present and engaging to watch.
Before you go, I have to ask you about Wheels Ontario.
Of course.
For those people who haven't seen it, could you explain Wheels Ontario?
Sure. Wheels Ontario is, I would say, an homage, not a parody, an homage, a loving homage to Degrassi. And I play a character named Mikey, who is new. We started where he's new at a school where everyone in the school is in a wheelchair except for him.
Okay.
And he's made fun of for his ableness. His nickname is Legs. And then we took that first episode that we did and just spun it into this whole world of the Wheels world, and then spun off a couple of the characters from Wheels Ontario. My character, Mikey, is actually played by a character named Brian Lacroix, who is like a pop star similar to Bieber and others. And John Daly, who really conceived of the idea for Wheels Ontario, plays Coach Teacher, and his character, Coach Teacher, is played by a guy named Gene Creamers.
Okay.
And so we spun those characters off into another show called Show Us Your Songs Toronto, which is sort of America or Canada's Got Talent kind of show, and it became a showcase for all types of different Canadian and other talented folks.
Some people know Degrassi in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
How popular is it? We're always curious, first of all.
With certain people, it's incredibly popular. I I personally didn't know much about it until we did the show. But the John Daly and Joe Mandy, who are two writers on Kroll Show, loved it and were obsessed with it. And one of our directors, editors, Dan Longino. And so amongst certain people, like my friend and her friends had a weekly Degrassi screening. They would watch it every week. And I think it's more for kids who grew up with cable.
Yeah.
And because I think it was quite present on cable. I think it was probably like on Nickelodeon growing up for us or something like that. But it was, for certain people, is hugely popular. And then I think Drake, the rise in Drake's popularity, I think, increased its awareness. And that's where we got the Wheels idea. It was, obviously him being Wheels on the show. That I think has raised its notoriety.
Why did you want to do a sketch making fun of Canada? We're hard to skewer.
Well, it turned out to be, I think the general Canadian joke in the U.S. is like, take off, eh? Or whatever. It's pretty... It's a pretty surface. I was less interested in that surface version of Canada and more interested in it. Just seems so fertile. Specifically, I think with Degrassi and accompanied shows was the openness and desire within Canadian culture to be very multicultural and to be very open to discussing real. And a show like Degrassi, very heavy, serious, dramatic issues that are truly interesting social dialogue, but also handled unbelievably fast and abruptly. You move through issues like abortion or drug abuse or molestation, pills, everything, and it's dealt with so fast and furiously.
Yeah, I remember that struck me when I was 9, and I'd go from, say, Saved by the Bell.
Yeah.
Straight to Degrassi.
Yeah.
And it was a real shock to the system.
Right. Well, I think it's a nice metaphor for the differences between Canadian and American cultures. Something like Saved by the Bell was, they sort of dealt with issues, but nothing really, like Jesse's addicted to caffeine pills or whatever. Yeah. Whereas like on Degrassi, it's like, oh no, like people have major like heroin problems, and they're sort of tackled earnestly and head on. Yeah. And I think like Canada is much better at that, but also it's kind of funnier to make fun of them for it.
Well, you're leaving your characters from the Kroll Show behind a bit and doing some more personal material now in your stand-up. And a movie, of course, like Adult Beginners. What are you learning now, writing in your own voice with the stand-up?
Well, I think, the goal is to never, I hope that I get to continue to do more of this personal, dramatic work, like in Adult Beginners, which is both very much a comedy, but also has some more emotional moments to it. And the stand-up is, it really is whatever strikes me. There's no, I'm talking about personal stuff as well as, fast food restaurants. And I think the goal is to continue to be able to do all of it. So the muscles that I was working on with Kroll Show, hopefully I'll continue to do in other forms, or some of the Kroll Show characters or worlds will continue to exist in some form or other. And hopefully the dramatic work will continue as well. I mean, for me, as the work I like to do, the more I get to have a diversified portfolio of stuff, the more I enjoy each one of them, and hope to be able to continue to do all of them.
That's great. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks for having me.